Metallica were never selfish with their success, but sometimes they were forced to keep other bands away from their stage.
There was too much of that rivalry. It was a little egged on by the press, and
They refused to play with other bands without thinking twice while turning down other groups was a decision they made with their head and not their hearts. Here are 8 bands Metallica refused to tour with and why. Starting our list is a band that Metallica would rather chew broken glass than tour with, and that's Iron Maiden. They had come out of the new wave of British heavy metal, while Metallica had emerged from the Bay Area thrash scene. They were already separated by the Atlantic Ocean, but things would occur that would take them further apart. Bruce Dickinson, the mercurial frontman of Iron Maiden, had publicly stoked the fire more than once. Back when Maiden had reassembled and wanted to make sure the world paid attention, Dickinson tossed out the sort of boast that a frontman uses like a flare. He declared in various interviews over the years that Iron Maiden would be better than Metallica. It landed like a dare, and for some fans it read like old-school British cockiness. Dickinson later explained that those lines were meant to needle the public rather than wound his peers, that they were what he called a wind-up, intended to declare the band's return with attitude rather than to start an actual feud. But a few mean words weren't the only reason Metallica refused to share stages with the Brits. For years, the two bands were simply on different tours, in different continents, managing global schedules, albums, and the logistics that make or break headline pairings. The closest they got to touring together was performing on the same day of a festival event, and it seemed like things would stay that way. And it did until the summer of 2014, the long-anticipated collision finally happened in Britain. Sonosphere, the festival that had become the continent's touring metal fair, booked both bands as headliners for Knebworth Park, a marquee event celebrating decades of rock history. For one weekend, Metallica and Iron Maiden were placed on the same bill in the UK for the first time, a symbolic moment that felt like a closure and a new beginning all at once. Promoters framed it as a celebration rather than a showdown, yet for fans it read like a balm on a strange old rivalry. These two could stand on the same grass and still keep the myth intact. In the years after, the narrative smoothed further. Dickinson doubled down on his description of the better than lines as strategic provocation, something designed to drive ticket sales and reassert Maiden's bite after a long absence. Metallica, for their part, treated the quips with a shrug and, at times, humor. Lars Ulrich was on record taking Dickinson's jabs in stride, which underlined the truth that this had always been as much theater as it was turf war. What remained was respect in public, and an unspoken acknowledgement that both bands had pushed metal into the mainstream on their own terms. Band number 7 is Green Day. If two bands really like each other despite their artistry, they'll make it happen. While Metallica's thrash sound kept them away from pop and punk-sounding bands during the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, saw bands from different genres of rock perform together more often. Metallica haven't performed with Green Day, but they have performed in place of them. The 2012 iHeartRadio Festival in Las Vegas wasn't one that Green Day were proud of. That's because frontman Billy Joe Armstrong threw a fit on stage. This was after he had a medical emergency in Bologna, Italy, in early September. And with what had transpired, Green Day couldn't continue, not with their frontman behaving like that. When Green Day couldn't make their festival slot, organizers reached out and Metallica answered. Lars Ulrich made a public statement saying, "Our good friends and fellow Bay Area residents, Green Day had to unfortunately cancel their plans to be there, so we are more than happy to fill in for them in our own unique way. We're hoping we can fill those very large shoes and do them proud." What makes this even sadder is that Metallica had plans to go on tour with Green Day. In an MTV interview, Lars Ulrich revealed plans his band made with U2 and Green Day. He said, "U2 came to San Francisco 2 summers ago, and we ended up having a lot to drink with them and Green Day following a dinner. I was told in the wee morning hours following this outing that members of U2, Green Day, and Metallica agreed to tour together. We haven't talked about it since, but speaking for myself, I'd be very up for that." But with Billy Joe Armstrong in rehab by the end of 2012, this tour never saw the light of day. And Metallica wouldn't want to have a tour with Green Day and leave him out of the picture. But these next guys knew they never belonged anywhere near Metallica. At number 6, we have the infamous Guns N' Roses. The crazy part of Metallica's relationship with them is that there was a time that you could tell Metallica fans that they would never go on tour with Guns N' Roses, and they would tell you that you were lying. 1991 was a great year for both bands. Metallica had released the Black Album on the 12th of August, 1991. It was this album that really catapulted them to fame. The lead single, Enter Sandman, turned out to be a monumental hit. And that wasn't the only popular song on the album. From The Unforgiven to Nothing Else Matters, this album was so successful that it demanded a tour. A month after Metallica gave the world this masterpiece of an album, Guns N' Roses followed suit with a double album set release, Use Your Illusion 1 and Use Your Illusion 2. The song titled You Could Be Mine even featured in the movie Terminator 2: Judgment Day. There were also covers of songs by music legends such as Bob Dylan and Paul McCartney. It seemed like the stars had aligned for these two bands at the same time. If the year 1991 proved anything, it was that two of the hottest bands could simultaneously enjoy great heights in their existences without stealing the spotlight from the other. So because of this, there would be nothing that would get the rock world more excited in 1992 than the two bands that literally stole 1991. Both bands knew that they had to make a joint tour happen. Their record labels and management knew that this wasn't just an option, it was a duty they had to fulfill. Opportunities like this come rarely, and they had to capitalize on it. So the Guns N' Roses Metallica tour was announced for 1992. Dates and venues were also released. Tickets sold out so fast that the bands were afraid if they would even be able to meet the demand of fans and play at as many venues as they needed to, but they were still able to fit in the logistics to make it happen. And they hit the road running. Guns N' Roses opened on some nights. Metallica opened on others. They put the Kyo in co-headlines. It never felt like one band was overshadowing another. There was no way things could go wrong until they did.
The pyro guy doesn't see me that I've walked back out there. A big colored flame goes right up under me. All my arm, my hand completely down to the bone. The side of my face, hair gone.
During Fade to Black, one of Metallica's most emotional songs, James Hetfield accidentally stepped into a blast of pyro that was supposed to be behind him. Flames shot up. They were over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and flames that hot were bound to send him to the ER, which they did. Metallica's set ends abruptly. The fans expect Guns N' Roses to jump in early to salvage something from the carnage. But Axl Rose refused. He insisted on the original start time, which meant fans waited over 2 hours for some live music. But the performance that Guns N' Roses gave was not worth the wait. The sound system started failing, monitors cut out, and Axl complained about throat problems. His voice cracked, his frustration grew, and halfway through the set he simply walked off. And fans didn't take this lightly. People started tearing down equipment, setting fires, overturning cars, and looting the stadium. Montreal turned into a riot zone. Police cars were flipped, dozens were injured, and thousands of dollars in damages were done. It was complete chaos. Metallica would later return to Montreal months later to make it up to fans with 2 half-priced shows. But Guns N' Roses weren't so lucky. They were banned for life from Montreal's Olympic Stadium. But that wasn't the only thing they were banned from. Metallica made sure that the disaster of a show that they had with Guns N' Roses was their last ever. The two bands never toured again after Axl proved to them that they could never truly count on him. Band number 5 is Offspring. They were just starting to blow up in the 90s, right around the time when Metallica were out proving themselves with the Black Album. The Offspring had just released Smash in 1994, an album that exploded beyond anything they had expected. Yet somehow, for all that momentum, the Offspring never toured with Metallica. It was not because Metallica had exactly shut the door. The way Noodles described it, they thought Metallica were great, legendary even, and over the years they met them and shared bills. But after Smash hit, the Offspring admitted they did not feel ready. They believed their live performances were not polished enough. They felt they were not yet a professional band, in the sense of being able to open arenas and support giants like Metallica. They thought they still needed to start small, build their live craft in clubs and smaller venues, and grow the show over time. When Smash became a smash hit, the Offspring were literally taken by surprise. Suddenly huge, yet internally they judged themselves as underprepared. Their live act, they felt, couldn't yet carry the weight of opening for arena-filling Metallica shows. So rather than rush into something that might falter, they chose to refine their stage presence, test their set lists, learn what worked live. That decision displayed a humility rare in rock. The music industry often pressures bands to scale fast, to grab every big opportunity immediately. The Offspring, instead, decided to climb steadily. That choice turned out to matter. It allowed them to grow without being destroyed by expectations they didn't feel ready to meet. It avoided a moment where a subpar opening could damage their reputation. Metallica, meanwhile, were going through their own turbulence around that era. Albums, changing sound, and expectations from fans all weighed on them. The Offspring's self-awareness meant they stayed out of a potential collision of high stakes before they felt confident. Looking back, when fans imagined that they co-bill with Metallica, it was more fantasy than destiny, because even though both bands shared respect, growth, and at times similar criticism for being too mainstream, their paths did not align in confidence or timing. The Offspring had shared that hesitancy out loud. They never believed their show was ready for Metallica's world at that moment, and in doing so, they preserved their integrity, kept growing, and avoided a misstep that might have haunted them later. Band number 4, Limp Bizkit. It was the late 90s and early 2000s, and metal was king. Metallica ruled the rock scene. Across the musical landscape, Limp Bizkit had exploded as the loud, unpredictable rebels of the nu metal movement. Fred Durst, with his signature backward cap and brash charisma, was everywhere. Many people believed that Metallica, being the older and more recognizable band, would take Limp Bizkit under their wing. But no, they didn't do that. In fact, they didn't do anything at all. No public shout-out, no mentions of them in interviews, and definitely no tour. But this wasn't an accident. Metallica built their identity on discipline, structure, and control. Every show was carefully planned. The lights, the sound, the pacing, the set list. Nothing was left to chance. Limp Bizkit, on the other hand, thrived on chaos. Their concerts were wild, unpredictable, and often unhinged. Fred Durst's onstage antics made headlines as often as his music did. To many traditional metal fans, Limp Bizkit symbolized everything wrong with the commercialization of rock. But then everything changed in 2003. Their paths finally crossed. Limp Bizkit joined Metallica on the second leg of the Summer Sanitarium tour, a massive stadium run that also featured Linkin Park, Deftones, and Mudvayne. But Limp Bizkit weren't co-headliners, they were openers. But their performance on the Chicago leg of the tour proved that this was a bad idea. 6 songs in, and the crowd weren't thrilled with their music. They wanted to skip having the likes of Metallica and Linkin Park. Limp Bizkit didn't have a memorable performance, as it was one they wanted to forget quickly. So the next few tours Metallica went on, they knew that they couldn't carry Limp Bizkit along. That moment cemented what many in the industry already knew. Touring with Metallica wasn't for everyone. For years, fans speculated about whether the two bands would ever reconcile, but nothing happened. Metallica moved forward with their evolving sound and lineup, while Limp Bizkit continued to polarize audiences. But after giving them the cold shoulder for over 2 decades, they finally forgave them after 22 years. Limp Bizkit were announced as special guests on Metallica's M72 World Tour across North America. For the first time in over 20 years, the two acts shared the same stage again. This time, there were no walk-offs, no delays, and no drama. The performances ran smoothly, and both bands seemed to have put their differences behind them. Fans who had lived through the chaos of 2003 watched in disbelief as the pairing that once felt impossible suddenly became a reality. Now that we're in the last 3 bands, you know you're bound for some real shocking names. And the first of those 3 bands is Nickelback. Together with Metallica, they ruled the early 2000s. A concert would have been remembered for ages. It would have literally rocked the rock world, except it never happened. But there was every reason for it to. These two bands had chemistry, and more importantly, they were super friendly with each other. Robert Trujillo, Metallica's bassist, had publicly acknowledged that respect. In an interview with Music Blog, he praised Nickelback as super cool and described their bassist, Mike Kroger, as awesome. He made a point of saying that despite all the criticism Nickelback faced, they had friends within the very rock community that often dismissed them. That kind of camaraderie spoke of something deeper than surface judgments. At the same time, Chad Kroger had shared a revealing anecdote about his brother Mike's friendship with James Hetfield while they were both in Maui. Kroger said that Mike often confided in Hetfield about how the backlash of fame made him feel isolated and misunderstood, and Hetfield readily identified with those feelings. "Suddenly, I didn't feel so bad anymore," Kroger recalled. In that moment, two musicians from different camps discovered a personal bond over shared burdens. Still, shared empathy was never enough to anchor a tour. Timing and trajectory matter in rock history. When Nickelback was gaining momentum, Metallica was reeling. Their album Saint Anger had been met with harsh critique. It was widely regarded as a contentious moment in their discography, one that strained their relationship with longtime fans. That period demanded careful navigation and, many assumed, minimal risk. Meanwhile, Nickelback was facing their own firestorm of public backlash. They were accused of formulaic songwriting, overexposure, and lacking authenticity. Over time, many fans dismissed their work outright. To Metallica, who had spent decades cultivating artistic integrity, aligning with a polarizing name, risked compromising the very core they protected. In the end, the two bands remained parallel myths, close enough to imagine, but distant enough to never converge. They never shared the big stage or carried a joint banner, even though at times their paths looked like they might. At band number 2, we have Creed. They were everywhere in the last decade of the 20th century as they dominated rock radio with anthems like "With Arms Wide Open" and "My Sacrifice." Within the rock and metal community, Creed's rise was met with mixed feelings, especially among the Linkin Park harder-edged acts of the era, like Metallica, who, despite reinventing themselves with their more mainstream Load and Reload albums, still saw themselves as the keepers of heavy metal authenticity. Even if Creed wanted to take Metallica's place, they would have to deal with their own problems first. Public meltdowns, infighting, and the infamous Chicago concert in 2002, where Stapp wandered off stage while drunk, forgot lyrics, and mumbled through entire songs. It was so bad that fans actually sued the band for ruining their night. That single event did permanent damage to Creed's image. Suddenly, they weren't the kings of post-grunge anymore. They had become outcasts of the rock world, a clear representation of what no band should strive to be. Creed and Metallica never toured together not because of a feud, but because they lived in different worlds. Metallica was thrash metal's global institution, carrying decades of credibility, grit, and live dominance. And Creed, given the hate they were receiving, made them the last band big names like Metallica would want to work with, let alone go on tour with. Band number 1 is one that Metallica only refused to tour with because they had to, not because they wanted to. Linkin Park. It is one of the more shocking band touring tragedies, because these two bands should have toured together more often, especially after the Summer Sanitarium tour of 2003. It was just too good of a tour to imagine that it would be the only time these two bands would. During that tour, Linkin Park had everything to prove. They were coming off the massive success of Hybrid Theory and Meteora, and opening for Metallica meant performing in front of audiences who didn't always embrace new sounds easily. Metallica's crowds were notoriously tough, sometimes even hostile toward opening acts. But something special happened. Linkin Park won them over. Mike Shinoda once recalled how much respect they received from Metallica and their fans, saying it was one of the best tours they ever did. The two bands bonded on the road, shared laughs, and even pulled a prank together when Linkin Park invaded Metallica's stage with a mock picnic during Master of Puppets. It was lighthearted, fun, and showed the mutual respect between them. But after that, their paths began to drift apart. Linkin Park were no longer just another rock band. They were the face of a new era. Their fusion of rap, metal, and electronic sound was dominating not just radio, but cinema. They became Hollywood's go-to band for soundtracks, shaping the sonic identity of movies like Transformers and The Matrix Reloaded. While Metallica were the titans of the old guard, Linkin Park became the leaders of the new school, a band too busy carving their own lane to stay on the same touring circuit. Their artistic direction had changed, and their schedules became packed with global tours, studio sessions, and movie deals. Still, the respect never faded. Metallica admired what Linkin Park had built, even if their worlds rarely crossed again. And when tragedy struck in 2017, with the heartbreaking loss of Chester Bennington, that respect turned into reverence. Metallica publicly mourned his passing, and from that point on, the idea of another joint tour became something sacred, something best left untouched out of respect for Chester's memory. There you have it, 8 bands that Metallica outright refused to tour with. They later changed their mind with some of the bands, but they did eventually go on tour with. Which group do you think they should never have refused to tour with? Let us know all your thoughts in the comment section, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel so you never miss any of our uploads.